Greetings fellow flatcaps and welcome to the Spectrum, and welcome to a very special episode of Have You Heard? I've been wanting to expand the medium that we cover in Have You Heard for a while, but I wasn't sure what to do first. But I think I found a good starting point. We have looked at Lovecraft inspired video games before. This time however we're going to be looking at a Lovecraft inspired board game. The Lovecraft theme is no stranger to the board game world. There have been a fair few numbers of card games and board games and RPG games that I plan to cover in the future on this channel. Today, we're going to be looking at one of my favourite Lovecraft board games and one of my top 5 board games ever, Mansions of Madness. Specifically the second edition, Mansions of Madness is a board game where up to 5 players take on the role of investigators and work together to solve a mystery, during which they will face the threat of death and madness. And you know that because it's in the title of the game, and because of the hentai monster in the corner. This game also features a free downloadable app that will allow you to play for an interactive story while the app controls the enemies and makes events happen that will affect the board as you play. If that sounds interesting, then I invite you to sit thy buttocks down as I show you just a little bit of a game that me and Aka played, offering you a taste of what the game has to offer. As with any board game, first is the setup. The first time you play a board game, it may have an image of a complete setup in the instruction book. Sometimes these can be intimidating to look at, but once you set it up, you'll find it's really easy to understand. The game pieces consist of cards,
plop,
dice, map tiles, monster tokens with figures, various tokens, Pringles tin not included, and playable character figures. All of which have an easy to understand role and purpose. And of course, we can't forget the app. I'm using the Steam version, but it can also be acquired on phone and tablet via the Play Store, and so on. The app is necessary to play, so if you can't access it, you're shit out of luck. And should open up Uno instead. That's a game that brings people together.
The one card I don't have, fuck you!
When you open the app, the first thing to do is head to More and make sure you tell the game what versions and additional content you already have of the board game, so that the app can use content from any of these things, including the first edition. For first time players, the instruction book recommends the Cycle of Eternity scenario. As much as my experienced player blood is wanting to tell the book to go fuck itself, it's best to show you this as it's the easiest scenario and a good introduction to the game's mechanics. Bear in mind that this is just one of 22 scenarios to play. Some are behind a paywall and some can only be played if you have the correct add-ons. Well, played properly. I mean, you could just replace a monster you don't have with, say, a Skittle or an anti-depression tablet. If you are worried about this particular scenario being spoiled, you've got another 21 to play and scenarios play out differently every time you try them. What I will mention though is this here, the time limit.
Bullshit.
I played this with 5 friends once and it took us 4 hours to finish. And with me and Naka it took 2.5 hours. Not because we're stupid, though that is true, but you will see why as we dive into the game. Once you've chosen your mystery, you'll be asked to choose your investigators. Depending on which add-ons you said you had, will determine how many investigators are available. With just me and Naka playing, we decided to take on more than one character each. I took Michael McGee, a gangster, and William Yorick, a gravedigger. Aka went with Agatha Crane, the parapsychologist, and Ashcan Pete, one man and his dog. Essentially, we made the old-timey Scooby-Doo crew. Scooby-Dooby-Doo! Characters aren't just a pretty face. Each investigator comes with a card and a figurine. The cards are extremely easy to understand. A portrait helps you find a figure to represent you on the board. The heart and brain symbols represent how much physical and mental damage that character can withstand. A unique ability for every character will soon have you picking a favourite. Mine is Ashcan Pete because he gains access to his cute little doggo, Duke. Aww. Finally, each character has 6 stats that vary from 1 to 5. The stats will represent a category of test that character will have to engage in, and the number represents how many dice they get to roll during said test. So for example, if Michael had to break down a door, chances are he would need to do a strength test, and with a strength of 5, he gets 5 dice to roll and has a better chance of success. But it's not a guarantee. After characters have been chosen, the game will assign you some random supplies for starting the level. This symbol in the corner will tell you which deck you can find them in. The satchel means it's a common item, the lockbox means it's a unique item, and a card with this layout is a spell. Players will decide amongst themselves who gets what. Side and unrelated question though, who out of these investigators decided it would be a good idea to bring a weapon, but decide it was a 2x4? Hey, we're going to investigate some disappearances, do you want to come? Cool, I'll bring my stick. Investigators also start with 2 clues, technically a kind of currency, but very valuable, for reasons you will see later on. Once all players are ready, the game begins with a short audio story setting up the plot.
You slump into your office chair after another long day of interviews. You've been investigating the disappearances surrounding a wealthy neighborhood for 2 weeks, but you have nothing to show for it. The telephone rings. You answer and hear the panicked voice of an older man.
Is this the investigator who visited the Vanderbilt estate?
You flip through the files on your desk. William Vanderbilt, a wealthy bachelor, mother recently deceased. He has refused to meet with you, but you were able to speak to several members of his serving staff.
This is Eugene, Mr. Vanderbilt's butler. I didn't know who else to call. The police think I'm crazy. Unnatural things have started happening here. I'm worried for my master. I think he's in danger. Please, help.
Finally, a lead. You hang up the phone, throw on your coat, and leave for the Vanderbilt estate.
When you're in game, prepare for lots of reading, because you're going to be seeing these text boxes a lot. If you hate reading, this is not the game for you. Despite how many there are, they are important because they will give you narration for the story and instructions on setting up the board. The descriptions in them will also help set up the atmosphere of the level, along with the app's creepy music. Once in the game, one of the first things you'll notice is that the board is incomplete. That's because you will build the map as you navigate through it. When starting a scenario, your first task will be to build the map with the tiles it names and arrange them as they are in the map. Characters are then placed on the indicated square, and finally interactable tokens are placed around the board. Each have a description of what they are, and each type serving a different purpose. Once the setup is complete, you can begin to play. Each round takes place over 2 different phases. First is the investigator phase, where the players will have their turns. Now that you finally get to play, players decide who goes first, and that order can change every investigator phase. Each player gets a total of 2 actions, of which there are 7 to choose from and can be repeated twice. I went first and decided to get Yorick to do an explore action, starting with a pile of papers on the desk. In the app, clicking on a question mark or a search token will result in a few possible outcomes. In this case, it was some text relating to a clue with an instruction for the player to receive a clue token, and discard the search token. Then I made Yorick scout ahead by making him do a move action, which allows him to move 1 to 2 spaces on the board, and ended his turn. Michael was up next. I also made him move and explore a search token. This time it was a painting. Unlike Yorick's token, this token required a skill test. The app will use a symbol to inform the player which skill is needed for the test. Michael had to make a lore test using 2 dice. Not the best job for a guy who likes to hit things with a stick. When rolling dice, there are 3 potential results: a star, which is a success, fuck all, which is a failure, and a magnifying glass. When a player rolls a magnifying glass, they can spend a clue to convert this into a success, an absolute lifesaver when things get rough. Because of this, Michael was able to achieve a score of 2. Entering it into the app will tell you if you passed or failed and instruct you on what to do next, if anything. Michael passed the test and was rewarded 2 clues for it. Woohoo! Pro tip: These checks keep track and stack the results of all previous fail results, meaning that if you failed the first time, you'd have a better chance the second time, even if another player attempts it after you. Then it was Akka's turn. She decided to get Pete to explore the Explore token next to him, representing the sound of a struggle coming from another room. Like search tokens, Explore tokens may or may not need a check or an item to be used. In this case, there was no such requirement and a new room had been revealed. When revealing a new room, you approach it in the same way you would be setting up the map. Find the tile in the pile, orientate and add it to the map, place the required tokens down, and in this situation, add an enemy, a weapon, and an NPC. When a monster spawns on the map, you can either place down a figure of said monster, or just use the token. Using the figurines, while it does make the board look cooler, does require a bit of fidgety assembly. You need to place the token inside this stand, then fasten the figure on top. Unfortunately, not all the figures fit well on the stands, and breaking one will be very easy while you try to secure it. So to save time and effort, we just use the tokens. Though I should mention that the Star Spawn, or Baby Cthulus as I call them, are absolutely adorable. Look at his little face. When you reveal a new room, you will also get the choice to freely move one square into that room. Though most people probably wouldn't for some reason. Not Akka though, she sent Pete in to try and steal the knife from the table. In order to reach the knife, Pete needs to pass the monster, which will require an evade test. In the app is a monster tray. Here you can click on enemies to initiate attack or evade checks. Evade checks are necessary when a player attempts to move away or perform an action that isn't attacking a monster they share a space with. The app will present a challenge that tests a random stat of the character. The test wants Pete to perform an agility test and score 2 successes to pass. Sadly though, Akka didn't pass and Pete had to forfeit his action. If she did pass though, she could have continued with her intended movement toward the knife. So Akka did the next best thing and sent a little old biddy, Agatha, to get the knife. This time, the test wanted Akka to roll an agility test with 1 less dice than what is written on the character card. She also had to negate incoming damage rather than achieve a certain score. There will be times where your character will face getting hurt in some fashion, and you'll be asked to roll a stat check to try and negate the incoming damage. In this test, negating enough damage meant that she would escape. But if she did take at least 1 damage, then she would have to forfeit her turn. 2 dice in hand, Akka made the roll and passed, got away from the monster, and used her second action to pick up the knife. Granny got a knife, she gonna stab a bitch. Once all investigators have had a turn, it's time to initiate the Mythos phase. While the first Mythos phase of the game isn't so bad, further in, the chances of death or insanity get bigger and bigger. The risks are very high if any of these things happen, because if one player, just one player dies, it's game over. The Mythos phase has the potential to do tons of damage every time, and it's composed of 3 different stages. First is the Haunt stage, where a supernatural event will affect the players. Who and how many players it affects will change every time. Whoever is affected most of the time will need to make a test to avoid the incoming damage, but there are times where you have no choice but to receive damage. Arsehole game. In the second stage, each monster on the map will have a turn trying to deal physical damage to the players. The app will instruct you how a monster will move that turn, and regardless as to if it can or cannot attack, the app will give you more instructions. Again, a mixture of stat tests and damage negation will be required from the player. The final stage is the Horror Check stage, where monsters attempt to inflict mental damage on players. These checks can affect lots of players at once. If any amount of players can see a monster that is up to 3 spaces away, they must make a check against that monster. If there are multiple monsters, then they must make a check against the one with the highest horror rating, the spookiest boy. When all 3 stages have been resolved, it's back to the investigator phase. Thankfully, we managed to come out of this one with very minimal damage, but, as I said, the further we got into the game, the more likely this damage would be applied. And all that was just the first round of the game. As the game continues on, it will become more intense, more deadly, but best of all, more fun. Other challenges like sliding puzzles and threats like stronger monsters and even players who have gone insane will attempt to stop you, making defeat just as likely as victory. Bear in mind though, that I haven't gotten close to telling you everything there is to know about this game. If I did, we'd be here for hours. Though, if you are genuinely interested and want me to make a how to play video, then I will gladly do it. I just need to know. Whether you watch or play this game, it's an absolute treat. And if you like your horror, there's going to be some very tense moments when playing this game. Moments where you have to fight off a zombie with your bare hands while your character is suffering with a broken leg. Moments where an investigator fails a test and drops their lantern in fear, which starts a fire and separates the party. These are just two examples of the stressful but entertaining situations you could find yourself in. But the game also has its share of satisfying moments too. The sense of satisfaction you have when you find a powerful weapon, the relief when you successfully cast a spell while running the risk of it backfiring and hurting you, and using judo to fight monsters. One thing I should mention though is that you could find it a bit intimidating to learn because of all the semi-complicated mechanics and tokens to remember. For me, that is a personal plus, as I like trying to figure out complicated things and putting careful thought into my actions. You at home, however, will have to decide for yourself if this is something that appeals to you. I would though highly recommend this game. The app is very well made and is a refreshing new way to experience board games. Other games use this feature and I plan to cover them in the future, but I will also be focusing on more traditional ones too. So if you like your horror, if you like your Cthulhu, or if you just like watching other people suffer, then Mansions of Madness is definitely a game I recommend you give a go. And that is Mansions of Madness 2nd edition. Thanks for watching everyone, and remember you're always welcome at the Spectrum.